Well, hi everybody. Welcome. Please turn your cell phones to silent. That's the real reason I'm up here, is to remind you to please do that. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Patty Wolter, and I teach in our magazine department. Thank you so much for joining us today to hear from our special guest, Stephen Rodrick. Stephen Rodrick has what many of our students would consider the magazine writer's dream career. He is a generalist with specialties, which means he's a contributing writer for the New York Times Magazine, for Men's Journal, for Rolling Stone. He writes about many subjects, but film, politics, and sports tend to be the categories he gets to have specialties in. This means he's profiled characters as diverse as Lindsay Lohan and former NYC Mayor Rudy Giuliani, and Senator Fred Thompson, to NFL player Donovan McNabb. He can watch zombie movies with Christopher Walken and then spend an entire season embedded with a high school wrestling team doing immersive narrative reporting. And he gets paid for all of it. We're delighted to welcome Stephen back. He's one of our alums. I not only teach his work in my class, he graciously allows my students to edit his work. Thank you. Thank you for submitting your work to that process. He's here with us today because of his latest immersion experience, more than 2 years with his father's former Navy squadron, and his first book, The Magical Stranger, A Son's Journey into His Father's Life. I'll let him tell you all about it. There will be time for questions about the book and his magazine life, of course, at the end of the talk. Please give a warm welcome to Steve Rodrick.
Well done. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'll give you just a very quick background on the book before I read from a couple sections. The book is basically about my father, who was a Navy pilot who was killed in a plane crash when I was a kid. And the book is basically two stories. One, my family story, and trying to learn more about his family, or learn more about my father through talking to his family and kind of investigating his life a little bit more. But the other part is I followed my dad's old squadron for 2.5 years as they deployed to the Persian Gulf, and that really helped me understand what his life was like, to go out on a deployment with him for a month at a time and just see, kind of walk in his flight boots a little bit to see what that was like. So I like to say that the reading is sort of broken into two parts, and the first part is the bummer, but the second part, if you stick with me, is purportedly funny. So thanks everybody for coming out. In an airless stateroom aboard the USS Kitty Hawk, I find my dead father. Somewhere off the Vietnamese coast, the roar of an FA-18 Hornet shot from the carrier's No. 2 catapult blasts me awake. Pilots learn to sleep through the bash and rattle of launches and recoveries. But I'm not a pilot, just a reporter, a tourist by another name. Now my father, he was a pilot. When I was a boy, he chased sky and sea off this very ship. One day, his plane dipped imperceptibly, a wing tapping the ocean, and disintegrated. All that remained was black oil and a white helmet floating in a blue sea. Still groggy, I watched my no-nonsense roommate run a razor over his face and slap on aftershave. A moment later, the door slams behind him. I detect a familiar scent, one that is flinty and masculine. I jump down from the bunk and open the medicine cabinet. Inside is his blue bottle of Aqua Velva aftershave. I remove the cap and inhale. The smell takes me back. It's May 28, 1979 in Oak Harbor, Washington. Upstairs in the master bedroom, Commander Peter Rodrick wears a white undershirt and briefs. Gray creeps in at the temples. He slaps on Aqua Velva and winces. He carefully places a speck of yellow toilet paper on his chin. He always cuts himself there. In the mirror, he catches me peering around the corner. I'm 12. My fingertips are black from folding copies of the Seattle Times. What's the matter, knucklehead? I don't want you to go. Why? I'm scared. Never been scared before. Scared of what? Scared something bad's going to happen. Dad messes with my hair. It'll be fine. No, try and get along with your mom and don't fight her on everything, even if you're right. A few minutes later, he heads downstairs and kisses my mom. She carries my baby sister, Christine, not quite 2 years old. Mom is trying to be brave, but it doesn't come easy. One afternoon when I was 2, Mom made peanut butter sandwiches for my older sister, Terry, and me in our small bungalow on Meridian Naval Air Station in Mississippi. She flipped on the TV and started watching Days of Our Lives, but it was interrupted by a news bulletin. reporting the crash of a Navy T-2 a few hundred yards short of NAS Meridian's runway. The T-2 was Dad's plane. She turned off the television and tried not to go to pieces. A car pulled into the driveway, either Dad or the chaplain. The door opened and there was my father, a bandage on his forehead, his flight suit ripped and blackened from ejecting. That was 5 moves and 4 cruises ago. Barbara Rodrick has raised 3 children on her own while her husband has spent 1,100 days of the last 6 years at sea. He's been making hundreds of landings on the Oriskany, the Forstall, the Nimitz, and now the Kitty Hawk. There are more lonely days ahead. Today leaves for a 6-month deployment in the Pacific, his third cruise flying an EA-6B Prowler, a radar jamming plane. He swears to her that this is the last one. Next will be the Pentagon or some other shore duty. He promises he will be there for her. She believes him. He does not tell her he's applying for the Space Shuttle program. Her 2 girls are low maintenance. I am not. I arrive a month premature with my dad's brains, but not much else. My chart reads slight discoordination of his right side. That's an understatement. At school, I talk and talk, gulp air and talk more. Fill in the oval test put me in advanced classes. Actual grades remove me from these advanced classes. Listening eludes me as do the intersecting laces of my shoes. It's time for Dad to go. Everyone loads in the car for the 15-minute drive to Whidbey Island, Naval Air Station. Except me. I have papers to deliver. This isn't a small thing. Delivering papers is the only structure in my ADD, dad-always-gone life. Mom thinks it's a good idea that I stay with my regular routine even on departure days. I don't argue. Car doors slam while I stuff rubber band papers into my carrier bag. Dad backs the wagon out of the drive and pulls away. I give a last wave. He doesn't see me. But Dad's dream comes true on the 4th of July. Peter Rodrick will become commanding officer of his own squadron, VAQ-135, the Black Ravens. He will be just 36, one of the youngest skippers in the Navy. He's on the fast track, maybe all the way to Admiral. But that's grown-up talk. All I know is that on December 10, 1979, I'm going to fly from Seattle to Honolulu and ride back to San Diego with Dad aboard the Kitty Hawk. The voyage will take 6 days, longer than I've ever spent alone with him. Finally, there will be time. I can come clean about faking sick so I could watch the Red Sox-Yankee one-game playoff last October. The Sox are Dad's team. I think he'll understand. Finally, I can learn what my father does. I know he flies jets off carriers, but how? Finally, I can ask him why things seem so hard all the time. In the months leading up to the trip, the time passes slowly. The other wives come over almost every night. I watch Kathy Brown cry in Mom's arms. She is pregnant and scared. The other wives smoke cigarettes, drink wine, and talk about their absent husbands. Are they safe? Are they faithful? Gray settles back over the island. The illusion of summer is gone. At last it is fall. We're down to numbers I can understand. 23 days, 22 days. The Kitty Hawk drops anchor in the Philippines, just a few weeks away from when we will depart for Pearl Harbor. I brag about my trip to customers when I collect for the paper. They smile, back away, and close their doors. But on November 4, Americans are taken hostage in the U.S. Embassy in Iran. I fold my papers and stare at pictures of blindfolded Americans. I don't connect the dots. Then, 2 weeks later, in the middle of a November night, Dad calls from the officer club in Subic Bay. Mom says he wants to talk to me. I rub the sleep out of my eyes and encradle the phone. He says he's sorry. The boat is being turned around, off to the Persian Gulf as a show of strength. I don't know what that means. I just know there will be no trip to Hawaii. Dad's letters continue to arrive from somewhere in fits and spurts. They used to be marked in the back with the number of days until his return. Now he just circles the seal on the envelope with a question mark and an unhappy face. Then it's the morning of November 28th. Mom sleeps in because Christine has been up with the croup. By 11 a.m., I'm trying unsuccessfully to skate backward at the roller barn for 8th grade gym class. I can tell you the electoral college breakdown of the Carter-Ford presidential election and the status of Kenny Stabler's wobbly knees, but when it comes to the things that confer acceptance upon boys, hitting a baseball, building a catapult for Weeblos, roller skating backwards, I'm hopeless. I need someone to show me how, someone to tell me that it really doesn't matter anyway. But that man is always 8,000 miles away. So I fall on my ass. The cool kids snicker. My gym teacher calls me over. I'm relieved at first because it stops laughing. But the teacher's permanently upbeat face has gone flat. She points to a man standing by the snack bar. He wears a black uniform and carries a white hat in his hand. It is Lieutenant Commander Laddie Coburn, Dad's best friend. I slowly skate over and sit down on a bench. He hesitates, sits down next to me, and puts a hand on my knee. Your father's been in an accident. He says there's hope. The healers are still looking. I don't believe him. I'm now 13 and I've grown up around the Navy. If they haven't found him by now, they aren't going to. He drives me home, and the world rushes toward me hotter and faster than ever before. I choke back vomit. We arrive at the house on North Conifer Drive. This time, the chaplain's car is in the driveway. Inside, the wives have already gathered. They smoke Virginia Slims and laugh without conviction. Mom, just 37, looks different. She became old the moment the doorbell rang. Later that day, it is confirmed that Commander Peter Rodrick and 3 crew members are dead, 63 miles south of Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean. There are no bodies to recover. The men leave 4 widows and 7 children under the age of 15. I still deliver my papers, almost done. An old crone who never tips steps into her weedy yard. She wraps me in a hug. She heard about Dad on the news. Her tears drop onto my last remaining newspaper. The blot grows and expands, obliterating words. It's dark now. I put my bike back in the garage next to Dad's shrouded MG. I slip past the grown-ups, up the stairs, and into my parents' bedroom. I breathe in deeply. Nothing. I frantically look in the medicine cabinet, then under the sink, but the bottle and the smell is gone. An hour before my father's memorial service, a family friend slips me a tablet, probably Valium, leaving me with a detached third-person feeling for the rest of the day. At the chapel, 4 caps sit on the altar. 3 of the wives are quiet, but Kathy Brown, now the widow of Lieutenant James Brown Jr., loudly bleeds grief, holding a tiny daughter who will never know her father. There are no coffins, but much talk of a loving God. More than 400 people sing Eternal Father, the Navy anthem to those in peril in the sea. Afterward, my family sits mute in our station wagon. Laddie Coburn leans through an open window and tries to console Mom. Come on, Barb, you can start a whole new life. Her response is a whisper. No. So that's the bummer part. One of the kind of great things about this whole experience was I was able to, by getting to know the guys in my dad's old squadron, I was able to eventually get up in a flight in my dad's old plane. And I was going to save it for the end, but I'm just going to show, it's probably only about 10 seconds you're going to see here, but it's still pretty nuts. And I will read from the hoops I had to jump through to get qualified to fly in this. One of the great things about following my dad's old squadron around for 2 years was they actually got me up in a flight. I could count the pine cones as we passed by them. It happened after. Okay, so that gives you a little glimpse of what I was aiming for. And the Navy, like anything else, is a giant bureaucracy that is just, I don't know if any of you have seen the movie Brazil, where the Robert De Niro character eventually drowns in paperwork. You're literally trying to machete your way through it. So for them to set up to get me up in a flight was no small thing. The only problem was I had to pass some swim and survival qualifications since we were going to fly at least partially over water. So this is an account of a 40-something, very uncoordinated man trying to pass a Top Gun-like survival program. The next morning, I settled into a conference room with 4 naval aviators at NAS Whidbey Island. Here's the thing. All of them had passed their swim and survival qualifications back in Pensacola during their flight training. All were under 35 and in pretty good shape. They were merely here for their quadrennial requalification. With any luck, they'd be drinking beer at the officers' club by 3 p.m. A lieutenant with frizzy hair walked into the room and turned on an overhead projector. The aviators guzzled their last of their coffee and slapped their necks in hopes of staying awake. She spoke about the psychological issues that can screw a pilot up in the cockpit. Fights with the wife, mortgage refinancing issues, a cold egg McMuffin. It could be anything. There was a discussion of cockpit distractions with case studies of planes flown straight into mountains because the crew was discussing baseball or checking out a minor cockpit glitch that should have been ignored until they were back on the ground. I couldn't help but think of what had happened to my father. The lieutenant finished her presentation and it was lunchtime. The Black Raven's F&G, fucking new guy, had been strong-armed into bringing me a Subway sandwich and some chips. Attempts at assigning him a call sign would eventually land on Sling Blade, a reference to his shifty black eyes, buzz cut, and cryptic guttural utterings. I tried to give him a few bucks for the sandwich. F&G grimaced. No, gotta go. I unspooled the intricately wrapped sandwich. This took me more than a minute, a reminder that my motor skills hadn't developed much since third grade. I was about to take my first bite when the lieutenant tapped me on the shoulder. Did I want to knock out my basic swim qualifications next door in the pool? Sure, I swam for exercise. This seemed like the easiest part. I changed into my trunks and met a civilian instructor in a blue windbreaker. He had grave, sad eyes. We shook hands. I would grow to despise this superficially harmless-looking fellow. He told me to swim 200 meters alternating between the breaststroke, the side stroke, the backstroke, and the crawl. This would be easy. Climbed to the top of a 25-foot tower, crossed my hands across my chest, and stepped over the edge. The water felt good against my skin. I moved easily through the water, taking about 6 or 7 minutes to swim the distance. I was barely winded as I lifted myself out of the pool. Mr. Instructor shook his head sorrowfully. He wore an expression frozen between contempt and pity. Your crawl was decent, but the rest of the strokes aren't cutting it. You're doing the breaststroke completely wrong. You're giving a frog kick when I want a scissors kick. You'd drown in 5 minutes trying to do that stroke in full flight gear. Dread began coursing through my body. Mr. Instructor requisitioned a squat Navy seaman named Nate. For a few minutes, Nate showed me the strokes. The Navy breaststroke was particularly vexing. The leg movement seemed the exact opposite of the breaststroke I'd been apparently doing wrong for my entire life. Okay, now give it another try, said Mr. Instructor. He glanced at his watch, pining for a long-past appointment with a cup of noodles. I jumped in. I started swimming. Mr. Instructor commenced screaming. No, the stroke is up, in, out, and glide. Up, in, out, and glide. I spluttered through the water, not drowning. I grabbed the side. Nate swam up next to me. Are you nervous? No. Why? Both your arms are twitching. He was right. My forearms were quivering. Sometimes this happens. I do well under pressure until I start thinking about the pressure. Mr. Instructor sighed dramatically. Take a break. We can try this again tomorrow at 6 a.m., but if you don't pass it, you can't do the rest of the quals. I slinked out of the pool. What did he mean, the rest of the quals? I soon found out. I got dressed and headed across the street back to the classroom. The lieutenant took me into a room and showed me a video of how to keep breathing while experiencing 5 or 6 Gs, an extreme force that, truth be told, I wasn't likely to encounter unless I was reborn a Blue Angels pilot. The Hick Maneuver involves keeping your core centered and doing a series of short, gasping breaths in, followed by short, strangulated breaths out, making a hick, hick, hick sound. I kept flashing back to a first aid film I'd seen as a boy where an epileptic made the same exact noises while having a seizure. I tried to get the breathing right, but the instructor told me I was doing it wrong. Try and make it sound less like you're choking to death. I tried it again. This time she stared at my hands. They were still shaking. Maybe you should just eat your sandwich and go back to the classroom. I started having this sick feeling that I was not going to get up in a prowler. I stumbled back into the lecture room. An instructor was already giving tips about ejecting from a plane near the carrier. He chattered on about releasing from your parachute harness and steering your chute away from the carrier deck and the carrier backwash. But I was too tired to really listen. After yesterday's 10-hour travel day, the current swim disaster, and lack of lunch, I was paying attention with perhaps a 1/12 of my brain. This was a key error. The brief ended. Navy technicians entered the room and began rigging a parachute to a previously unnoticed contraption hanging from a high ceiling. A few minutes later, I was told to change into a flight suit. A heavy pack was hoisted onto my back. A too large helmet was dropped on my head. I was hooked into a harness and virtual reality goggles were placed over my head. Before I could say what the hell, I was hoisted up 50 feet and then dropped. Through the goggles, I saw my boots and body heading toward a cartoon carrier. Someone started shouting, 1,500 feet from the deck. What do? Are you tangled? 500 feet from the deck. Steer away, steer away. I didn't either. I smashed into the deck. Someone laughed. Man, that would have hurt. Apparently, I missed the part of the lecture about IROC, a helpful acronym for idiots like me. Inspect your chute, release your raft, observe your situation, control your chute. By now, I was observing my situation, and it sucked. I was given 2 more tries. I died the second time and was probably a quadriplegic the third. The helmet came off. I noticed sweat pouring from my earlobes, a malady I had previously associated with a drug-addicted friend. I was led into another room. I climbed a ladder and was strapped into a mock cockpit. An instructor strapped me in with a canvas seatbelt. This is going to test your ejection skills. What ejection skills? My heart thumped through the apparatus. The instructor let out a shout. Okay, release. I tensed. I tensed so hard my back went into spasms typically reserved for bad breakups and IRS audits. Nothing happened. Somebody shouted, oh, sorry, I was getting a text. My bad, I forgot. A few seconds passed. Okay, release. This time my body was thrown backwards at 150 miles an hour. The cockpit shuddered before settling. At this precise moment, I had a thought, the dudes in the squadron are punking me. It wasn't impossible. These are grown men who had been known to wait for hours so they could pour a garbage can of ice water on a friend while he sat on the toilet on an aircraft carrier. It's quite possible they had arranged an elaborate practical joke and everyone here was in on it. I staggered out of the torture chamber. The lieutenant in charge took me aside. I understand you had problems with the swim qual, so you're going to have a long day tomorrow. You have to do at 6 a.m. and have a little rest and do the rest at 11 a.m. Apparently, I was not being punked. I stayed on the base that evening. I thought it'd be cool to stay in the bachelor's officer quarters while preparing for my flight. The BOQ was where my family spent the first 3 weeks on Woodby while we waited for our house to be finished. The building was essentially unchanged from 1974. It had the same squat 3-story Warsaw Pact era design, the only addition being televisions in each of the rooms. The place was designed to depress you so much that you would find your own place pronto. One night, as a 7-year-old, I wandered to the same halls in a semi-sleepwalking state. I soon found myself lost, trying random doorknobs until one opened. It was a young aviator, his flight suit draped over a chair. He was wearing nothing but his white t-shirt and briefs. He asked my name and then called down to the front desk. He asked for Pete Roderick's room number but told the operator not to ring through. He took me by the hand and led me back home. The pilot opened my family's room and lifted me onto my single bed next to my sister. My parents slept a few feet away. He held his finger to his lips in the universal shush signal. It'll be okay, just go to sleep. 36 years later, I repeated the pilot's line to myself. It'll be okay, just go to sleep. But I couldn't. From my third floor room, I had an unobstructed view of the chapel where my father's memorial service was held. I lay on my bed for a while, calculating the minutes until I had to be back in the water, an exact replication of how I counted down which read the minutes into school or baseball practice as a boy. I couldn't sleep, so I headed over to the base McDonald's and self-medicated with grease. I drove over to the chapel and pulled into the exact parking space in which we had parked our Buick station wagon on the morning of my father's memorial service. It was where my family sat paralyzed afterward. I looked out my window and I could see Laddie Coburn standing there, telling my mother she could start a whole new life. I saw my mother there too, just whispering no. I stared at the taillights of prowlers circling the base in the midsummer night. I said over and over again, I am not trying to be my father. I am not trying to be my father. And I couldn't tell if I was saying it with pride or shame. So over the next few days, I tried to pass a swim test, and I was so bad. It was like the Special Olympics. They had me just working across the short side of the pool rather than the long side. So this picks up a few days later. Mr. Instructor watched my progress doubtfully. He gave me an instructional video to watch back in the comfort of my BOQ room. That night I slipped a DVD into my computer. It was vintage early 1980s with Navy guys with Village People mustaches on the aviators, giving the film a Survivor gay porn vibe. But the DVD kept stopping just as a blonde man in a khaki uniform started doing the strokes. I handed it back to Mr. Instructor the following morning. The DVD scratched. I couldn't watch it. He disappeared for a moment into his office and came back. Plays fine on my computer. Maybe he didn't try hard enough. I thought of punching him, but did a quick cost-benefit analysis and walked away. Before I went in on Thursday, Sherm, who's one of the members of the squadron, told me a compromise had been brokered. I'd still have to pass the swim test, but some of the other requirements would be waived. We had a laugh about how inapplicable the swim quals were for a prowler crew. The prowler was too heavy. There would be no Captain Sully landing on the Hudson. In a prowler, you either hit the water and your body disintegrated, as happened to my father, or you ejected, floated down in your automatically opening chute, landed in the water in a self-inflating raft, and waited for the heelers to pick you up. Mr. Instructor's standards seemed to be based on some vision of Amelia Earhart ditching a single engine somewhere near the Azores. At the end of Thursday's remedial session, he walked into the pool area. It was time to swim the strokes. Okay, let's do this. He went inside to ask another diver to get into the water in case I drowned. I walked laps around the pool trying to calm myself. It didn't really work. By the time everyone was assembled, I was clutching my hands together behind my back so no one could see them twitching. Unfortunately, my knees were shaking too. I climbed the tower again. I prepared my hands for the drop, as I had been instructed, but got too close to the edge. I lost my balance and fell in the water with the grace of a kitten tangled in a burlap bag. I sprang up to the surface, sputtering, sorry, let me try that again. Mr. Instructor just shook his head. No, just go. I tried to take Nate's advice. Go slow, this wasn't a race. Still, I found my breaststroke breaking down into an imitation of a wheezing accordion. But I didn't hear anyone yelling to stop, so I kept swimming. I finished my laps and squinted up at Mr. Instructor. I wasn't perfect, but I guess it'll do. My elation was fleeting. The boss disappeared for a minute and reemerged with a flight suit, combat boots, and a helmet. I put them on and was thrown in the water. I was told to swim 50 meters in the gear, utilizing the Navy breaststroke. I tried to remember my up, in, out, and glide checklist. Didn't quite work, and soon I was doing an out, dog paddle movement. Still, I made it back and forth. The next task was to manually inflate my life vest. Mind you, this must be done while wearing thick flying gloves. I would just manage to get one tube out of the vest and start blowing air in it before I'd swallow a slug of water. The boss shouted at me, just put your head down, the helmet floats, you can't drown. He had a point, but I had a hard time breathing into a thin tube while I was face down in the drink. Talk about a logistical nightmare. It took 10 minutes, but I got the vest inflated. Nate high-fived me. Mr. Instructor almost cracked a smile. Okay, well, you got that out of the way. We'll see you tomorrow. I thought, the hell you will. I'm done. But I didn't say anything. I got dressed and slipped back over to my room. A few minutes later, I got a text from Sherm at the squadron. Come over, ASAP. I knew this couldn't be good news. I met him in the parking lot. Sherm did his wince of a smile. I got some good news and some bad news. Bad news is I got bad information yesterday. You have to pass all the quals tomorrow except one. I slapped my hands on the asphalt and cursed. Sherm cringed. Good news is you don't have to do the Dunker tomorrow. The one thing Sherm had got me exempted from was the Dilbert Dunker, a contraption shaped like the inside of a helicopter. It is dropped into water with 4 passengers aboard, then spun around. After that, the passengers have to find their way out. If the instructor is feeling particularly sadistic, he makes you do it blindfolded. When I asked what the purpose of this was, Mr. Instructor cheerfully said, well, this is in case you're rescued and then your helo crashes. I told him that would be the point where I would just say goodnight and prepare to meet the baby Jesus. Skipping the Dunker was a good thing, but that left all the other shit. The next morning, I headed over to the swim center. There were 4 other officers there for their tests. We put on our flight gear and jumped in the water. The first requirements were easy. A line was dropped from a 40-foot tower. All I had to do was hook it to a ring on my flight suit and be pulled up. From there, things took a bleak turn. I climbed back to the top of the dreaded platform and was strapped into a parachute harness. I would be dropped and then dragged back and forth across the pool until I extricated myself from my gear. This would require real dexterity since I'd be wearing the godforsaken gloves. The 4 officers got out of their chutes quickly, earning cheers from an elderly tour group that was sitting in the bleachers. Then I was dropped. I was dragged once, twice, 3 times, 4 times across the pool before my fingers were able to push up on my metal fasteners and slip out of the harness. The confused old folks went silent. A single out-of-time hand clap met my achievement. I was led back up to the tower. This time I'd have to extricate myself from the harness while wearing blackout goggles, where you can't see anything, and using only my bad hand. I didn't know what that meant. An instructor filled me in. Hold your good hand flat to the side. You're right-handed. Yeah. This was a lie. I felt bad about it for a minute until I remembered the naval aviator's modern mantra. If you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. This time I was dragged 5 or 6 times, but I was past carrying. Eventually I got out of my harness. I thought the end was in sight. I jumped off the platform again and was told to climb into my tiny life raft. A maneuver harder than it sounds when encumbered by water-soaked boots and helmet. But I didn't let out a yell. Fuck yeah! Mr. Instructor looked at me sideways. What are you so excited about? I'm done! You're not done. Back up the platform. You got to untangle your parachute. Climb back up. This time I jumped in and a mashed-up parachute was thrown on top of me. Sucked in a half pint of chlorine. For a moment I panicked and nearly cried for help, which would have resulted in a non-pass. Instead I took a second, gathered myself, and began passing the white mesh hand over hand until I was in the clear. Mr. Instructor helped me out of the pool. Now you're done. Are you sure you don't want to do the Dunker? Do I have to? No. Then fuck no. Mr. Instructor cracked a smile. I staggered over to the bleachers. Nate was waiting for me. We exchanged an extremely uncoordinated, heartfelt chest bump. I watched the real guys do the Dunker. Man, that did not look like fun. And then stumbled into the changing room. I had rarely been happier. An hour later, Sherman and some of the other guys met me over at the Officers Club for a celebratory beer. The guys gave me high fives. Everyone agreed it was insane that I had to go through the paces for a 2-hour flight that would be 99% over land that naval aviators had to do for 4 years of qualification. Listening in was a junior officer named Socrates. He looked guilty and slowly nosed his way into the conversation. Hey, Steve, I think that was my bad. I did your survival center request form. I guess I wasn't really paying attention. I think I was watching something on YouTube. I think I put in the regular request for you and not the one-time waiver thing. The room went quiet. Socrates wandered away. That totally makes sense, said Sherm. When I called over there to bitch, they kept saying, you requested all this. It's in your request letter. All I could do was laugh. I thought of a long ago pilot telling a lost 7-year-old boy that it was all going to be okay. For a rare moment, I believed him, and I just got another beer. Thanks for listening. Appreciate it. If anybody has any questions. Oh, sure.
My first question is your mom still alive, and does she know about, like, what were her thoughts, I guess?
Funny story. A lot of the book is about my relationship with my mom after my father died, and we had a kind of a tumultuous relationship even before that. I don't want to spoil the book, but we worked out many of the issues, so there's a happy ending. When I had the book in galleys, I didn't really want anybody else to read it first because I didn't want their influence to go into the book or influence me to take something out that I thought was important. But my mom, I thought, okay, I'm going to let her read it. That seemed the least I could do. So my mom lives in Michigan now with about 15 miles from my sister, so I flew out there with a galley and dropped it off at her house. She said, okay, give me a couple days and I'll read it, and I'll let you know what I think. So I spent a couple days with my sister and her nieces and her children, and got a phone call from my mom on a Sunday and said, I read the book, why don't you come on over? And it's like a 25-minute drive, and I drove over, and I'm like, oh boy, how's this going to go? And she said she read it, and she was proud of me and that she liked it. We didn't really talk about that much of the details. She made me a grilled cheese sandwich. We watched the Lions for a while, and then I went home. I went back to my sister's, and I'd rarely been this ecstatic in my life because I was like, I've dodged a freaking bullet, the size of a cannonball. So for the next day, I'm at my sister's house, and she's at work, and the kids are at school, and I'm just cranking music and just dancing around. I'm so happy that my mom doesn't want to kill me. So my sister comes home about 5 o'clock, and she just shakes her head. It's like, you got to go talk to Mom again. She's bitching about the book all over town. Oh. And all over town means 4 people. It's not. My mom doesn't have a radio show or anything like that. So I had kids. Don't try this at home. From some long ago illness, I had 1 Xanax, and I put it in my jean pocket. And I wasn't sure if I was going to put in my mom's drink or if I was going to take it when I got there, depending on how it went. And so drove up and literally parked like a half block from her house for a couple minutes. And I go, oh God, this is go terribly. And pulled in the house, or the driveway to her house, and I came in, and she's like, my mom is a very sweet woman who had a rough 4 or 5 years of her life, as you could imagine, losing your husband and being left with 3 kids and trying to find your way. But now it's this incredibly sweet woman. And she's like, I don't want to rain on your parade. I know this book means a lot, and I'm very proud of you, but I kind of come across as a bitch in it, don't you think? And I was like, I don't know if you come across as a bitch. I mean, there's a few problems that we had and stuff like that. And she's like, you go through the whole book, and everything you write is true about the problems we had, but there's no real mention of the fact that even at the worst times that I got food on the table 3 times a day, and that I carpooled you and washed your clothes and did all this. And I said, you know what? You're absolutely right. I'm a jackass. And I went back and added a few sentences through the book just to acknowledge that. Didn't really change anything about the nature of our relationship, which was troubled. But so I don't know if that's a happy ending, but it was an ending that resulted with neither one of us having to take that Xanax. So that was okay.
Questions?
Is this an idea that you had for like a very long time and then now you decided to do it? Or is it all these years later you decided maybe this is something I want to delve into?
No, about 10 years ago, I wrote a magazine story where I spent some time on an aircraft carrier, and right after that, I thought about doing a book and met with an agent. He's like, this is a great idea, and it's a great Father's Day book. We'll have it coming out right before Father's Day, and I had a problem with, as I would put it, the commodification of tragedy. But obviously, I clearly came to peace with it because the book's coming out and is being pushed for Father's Day. It was a story that I felt like I sort of had to tell, but one of the key reasons why I did it now was they were finally retiring my dad's plane, the one that you saw in that short video. And if I was going to follow his old squadron flying the same exact plane that they flew, it had to be starting in late 2009, early 2010, or it wasn't going to happen. So I kind of got cracking on it.
Somebody has a question.
I think. Okay.
Steve, talking about your mother, I think you were in Washington last week. Any negative reaction from any of the squad or their wives? Not that you paint them in a bad light, but there's some details that I know that I would be like, ooh.
Yeah, there's one of the things that I found in writing this book is that modern Navy life or modern military life is in some ways much more catch-22 than actual catch-22. And there's a kind of key moment in the book. Hunter Ware, who's the guy who has my dad's old job, he's up for a promotion, and there's 7 skippers on this carrier, and only 2 of them are going to get the promotion. And he doesn't get it, and one of the reasons his boss tells him he doesn't get it is because there was 4 guys in the squadron. They were just flying around the Pacific Ocean, and they were near Midway Island, and they were bored, and they decided to buzz the island. And the only problem, and that no one knew at the time, is that Midway Island had now been named a global Goonie Bird Refuge Center. So what had happened was, somebody on the island from the Department of Interior complained to their boss, who complained to their boss, who complained to somebody at the Department of Navy, and then the shit kind of trickled down, and Hunter and his men were called into the captain's office, and the pilot, his nickname was Hot Carl, kind of was smirking about it, and the commanding officer, you think this is fucking funny? I've got the Secretary of Navy calling me. This is not amusing. So in the book, when Tupper is his call sign, Hunter is his name. When Hunter does not get his promotion, it was like, this is I guess one of the good things about immersive journalism. I happened to be on the carrier, and he came down and knocked on my door, and I walked down to his office, and I thought I'd done something wrong or gone to some part of the boat I wasn't supposed to be in. I said, well, what's going on? He's like, I just got shot, which is a Navy term for my career has sort of been dead-ended. And he went on, he's like, my career, which I worked so hard, has been screwed up by these 4 substandard, mediocre prowler guys, which is the name of the plane. So Hot Carl, who I'm pretty friendly with, was not happy with that. And I tried to explain to him this was Hunter's feeling in the moment, and we all had shots of whiskey by the end of the night, Hunter and Hot Carl and all the guys. But there's a prowler, which is the type of plane my dad flew, kind of email network, and 80% of the people who've read the book so far is like, this is great, this is what it's really like. And there's a 20% who are just like, this is a betrayal of his father, who are looking for a rah-rah book. They're looking for a book that just waves the flag, and and I think that happens with a lot of not my stories, but other people's stories. You don't get to gauge what people's reactions are going to be, and you have to kind of just, suck it up and go through it. I mean, it's the least you can do. You get to follow these people around and choose these snapshots to represent their life. If they're not happy with it, I used to try to convince them that, oh no, this is a good, flattering portrayal, and now I just feel like you're entitled to your opinion. I'm sorry you feel that way. Yeah.
Did you spend a lot of time with the men from your father's, who had flown with your father, as well as the
I did.
flyers?
I tracked them down. some were most of them are, my father would have been 70 this year. Some of the younger guys who are in their early 60s are not in the Navy, but still work for the Pentagon as civilian contractors, and I tracked down as many of them as possible. And one of the reasons I wanted to do the book is because the image I had of my father was of this. We never talked about him after he died. His photos were all over our house, and models of his planes, and a flag from a grateful nation, but we never talked about him. And to me, he was always this hero on a hill that I could never live up to. And careful what you wish for. I mean, I probably talked to 7 or 8 people who flew with him, and 3 or 4 loved him to death. 1 or 2 thought he was an asshole, and 1 or 2 of them thought, I saw this accident coming, that he was a cowboy, which is a term for a reckless pilot. So, I got the good, the bad, and in between.
It can't be easy getting special access or even doing research when covering anything having to do with the military.
Sure.
How were you able to convince the Navy to cooperate?
That's a good question. To be quite blunt, a little bit is I don't know if I'd say it was a sympathy card, but they're like, this guy wants to write about the type of planes that his father flew, and his father was killed, serving his country. The least we could do is at least explore this. So I think if I'd just been somebody else who had no connection to this community, hadn't lived up there, and didn't share sort of the narrative of that base, I think it would have been much harder. But that did cut through some of the red tape. There still would be certain guys who, who weren't connected to that community, who didn't want me on board and stuff like that, and I just sort of had to deal with them as they came. But the fact that I was, in some ways, a son of NAS Whidbey Island, I think made it a lot easier for me to pull this off.
What about your credentials as a journalist, working for other?
The funny thing is that the guys thought that I had the cool job, and I was like, "What are you talking about? You're flying jets upside down over mountains at 600 miles an hour," and and the fact that I didn't have a ton of military writing experience, almost none. I'd done a story on the Colombian drug war about 10 years ago, but not much beyond that. But I think that they were sort of flattered that they're up in the spaces. I always point this way, up in the very northwest corner of Washington State, where they don't get a lot of attention. And I think they were on some level touched that someone would want to spend this much time with them. And they always made fun of. They called it, when you're going to get your hippie haircut, because I, had hair to touch my ears and stuff like that. But they all welcomed me, and like I said, I think it was partially because I had that connection to the community.
I had another one. I'm just curious about the aircraft carrier, and assuming, because you were up doing the flights and you actually landed on the carrier, what is that like? Because, of course, the only reference we have would be like Top Gun or something where they catch the planes with the clip. Is it really like that?
It is. It's like you can't. It's like a controlled crash. Imagine like being on the fastest roller coaster, but 5 times that faster, and it just coming to an abrupt halt, and you hope that you were strapped in properly. And in some ways, they taking off is even more kind of violent, because you're going from 0 to, you have to be at about 150 knots to, so it's one is like slamming on the brakes, and the other one is just like you're just being, for half a second, feels like you're being pulled into another dimension or something. So when I actually got up in the flight, they wanted to really show me a real flight. It wasn't just it was a couple circles. So we're flying upside down and doing all this stuff. And at a certain point, I puked a spectacular yellow liquid into a plastic bag, which they predicted would happen. And at first, I was sort of like nervous because we were just flying barely over the crest of these mountains and stuff like that. But I reached a point of what I'd call an awake coma, where I was so out of it, and we'd be flying deep into like a mountain, And the pilot would be like saying, well, if we were in a Cessna, we'd be crashing, but we've got these twin Pratt and Whitney engines, and he'd pull back the stick, and we'd go straight up and over. And at that point, I was like, I really could not give a shit if we flew into a mountain or not, because I was so out of it, my ability to care about my own safety was, I'd reached this kind of like nauseous, amused state. And it's like, yeah, whatever happens, I'll see you on the other side. So in the kind of postscript of that, when we finally went in for the landing, I was like, oh, God, and I just sweating from all parts of my body that I never sweated for. And we were going for a landing. I'm like, oh, well, I made it through it. And then we take off again. And I'm like, what's going on? And the pilot's like, I really need to do for my quals 5 to 10 touch and goes. So we went up and around, up and around, and up and around. So good times. So
It's like extra bonus for you.
extra bonus. It was like, yeah, the bonus round. Yeah.
Anyone else?
My question is about the writing process. And I know that because you've worked for publications like the New York Times Magazine, you're really no stranger to long-form storytelling. Do you go through a different process when you're actually writing a book, which is long form?
Well, I never had written a book before, so I had no idea. I was talking to a class earlier today where I said that magazine writing is like a quarter at grad school or something, where first 2 or 3 weeks you should be working, but you're just kind of screwing around. Next couple weeks you kind of up ramp. Week 6 or 7 you start to work, and the last 2 or 3 weeks are just complete panic. And that's what magazine writing is like. This is like, I guess, like finishing a dissertation. And while you have a year and a half or 2 years, the problem with that is that you just feel like, if I don't do my 1,000 words today, I'll do it tomorrow. I can catch up on the weekend or something like that. So you have to be sort of self-motivated. And I think my book is somewhat episodic, so I could finish chapters, and I could break it down to like, okay, this is roughly 25 5,000 word stories, with some connective tissue and stuff like that. And I think that made it easier to do. Not easy, but easier. So.
Well, that's a good segue. We have books outside, and Stephen's going to do a signing. So if you want to buy a book, he will sign it for you. And thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
coming.